Transfers, or decals, are something that is common to many forms of model making. They're a pretty simple way of adding extra details to your miniatures without having to perfect freehand drawing. But while they're a pretty straightforward concept, I'll be sharing a few tips and tricks to help improve the look of your transfers. So whether you're a beginner or already have some experience, I'll hopefully help you achieve that painted on look. And to help me demonstrate these techniques, I'll be applying some transfers to one of these Scots Guard minis from the Corvus Belli's Infinity range, who are also the sponsors of this video. Now, before you apply any of your transfers, your first step should always be to finish painting your miniature. I'd recommend painting the entirety of the model first and then apply your decals towards the end of the process, generally after your base coat layers, washes and highlights, but before you add any texture through weathering. The reasoning behind this is just to replicate how these markings are applied in real life. A surface would be painted, the stencils added over the top, and then the elements would take their toll. Mimicking this order in your own application helps to boost that level of realism. Once your model has been painted, it is almost ready to apply your decals to. But first, you'll need to apply some gloss varnish to the areas that you wish to add those transfers. This is a step that I've seen many people skip, and it is something I used to do as well. But to help me demonstrate exactly why I recommend this step, let's take a look at what happens if we don't. So, here I have a painted piece of styrene sheet. It's been primed and painted, but only one half has been gloss varnished. And onto this, I'm going to apply a decal to each side. But first we need to cover the very basics of decal application. So first we need to cut out a transfer from the sheet. Most transfers are generally only the size of the printed area, so when cutting them away, give yourself a little extra room around the transfer. I'm using my scalpel and hard-edged ruler for this, but small nail scissors work well too. Once you've removed your transfer, you'll want to leave it to sit in a shallow dish of water for about 10 to 20 seconds before removing. Don't leave it too long though, as the transfers have a habit of becoming completely unstuck. By soaking the paper in this way, you keep the transfer on the paper whilst allowing it to lift and just start to slide away from that backing sheet. Now, I will also quickly mention a product here called microsol. We will look into its partner product microsol later on, but as a quick aside, this is a mild decal solvent and can be added to your pot of water. You only need a small amount, and this will help to loosen the decal a little more easily. Now, not all transfer sheets are the same, and some will need a little more convincing to give up their transfers, and this microsol can help with that. I personally haven't found I've needed to use it all that much, but I thought I'd give it a quick mention. So, with the decal softened, you can use your tweezers to hold your transfer paper next to where you want to place it. Leaving that extra gap around the edge will make this much easier. Then, use a damp paintbrush to very carefully and very gently push the transfer off the sheet until you have a little hanging over the edge. You can then press this overhang onto your surface and pull away the backing paper so the transfer stays in place. Now, while the transfer is still wet, you can use your brush to gently reposition it, and once it's in place, you can leave it to dry. So, with the basics taken care of, how does that coat of gloss varnish actually help us? Well, first of all, the gloss varnish is there to protect your painstakingly applied paintwork. While water alone shouldn't reactivate the paint, there is always the chance that you accidentally leave water stains or even rub off some of your paint during this process. Secondly, the varnish achieves the glossiness by smoothing out the surface texture. This makes the application and readjustment of the transfer easier as you're not pushing it against a rougher surface. And finally, that same smooth surface will allow the transfers to adhere to it more completely, which helps to cut down on that outline you sometimes get around the outside of your transfers, which is sometimes referred to as ghosting. Now, the benefits of the gloss varnish aren't monumental on their own, but they will make things a little easier for your decal application and, along with the remaining steps, will contribute to a better overall finish. So, with all this in mind, let's repeat these steps on our Scots Guard miniature, applying those decals over the gloss varnish that I applied earlier on. As I'm doing this, you may have noticed I've placed my decal surface parallel to my work table. This is a small change, but it will allow gravity to pull the transfer onto the surface rather than it sliding across it. With our decal in place, I can now talk about that microsol that I mentioned earlier. Like microsol, this is just a decal softener, but it's a little stronger than the previously mentioned microsol. The purpose of this is to help the decal to conform to the surface and sit more closely to it, helping to create that painted on look that we're aiming for. Now, to demonstrate what a difference this can make, let's grab another piece of painted styrene sheet. Here I've applied 2 decals over the top of a gloss varnish, but I'll be applying my microsol to just one of them to show you what kind of difference it makes. So, using an older and preferably synthetic brush, you'll want to apply a small amount of microsol over the top of the decal. You're looking for just enough to cover the decal without spilling off. Also, while you're brushing it on, just be careful with how you brush the microsol, as you don't want to accidentally push the transfer out of place. Once you've coated it, simply leave it alone to dry for around 5 to 10 minutes and give the microsol a chance to do its magic. Once dried, you can then repeat the application once again with a second coat. Repeat these steps until you're happy with how the decal is forming to the surface. Now, as a quick aside, going back to that microset again, I have seen people who prefer to start with microset before progressing onto the microsol. Again, I've not found the need to do this myself, but it's always worth mentioning these alternate methods. After applying a couple of coats of microsol, you should be left with something like this. As you can see from the 2 pieces, the transfer on the right does look more like it's been printed onto the surface rather than just being a sticker. But over a flat surface like this, the true benefit of microsol isn't quite as obvious. The real benefit of softening your decals comes when you're applying your decals over curved surfaces like cloth and armor. These kind of surfaces often cause larger transfers to bunch up and fold in strange ways, and layering up your microsol will help to fix that. So, now that I've applied a couple of coats of microsol to the Scots Guard, you can start to see that painted on effect coming through, but we're far from done. Once your decals have been applied and you've coated them with microsol, your next task is to protect the decal and keep it locked into place. This can be achieved with another coat of varnish, and for this I usually go for a matte varnish in order to match the other surfaces around the decal. Matte varnish is also generally easier to paint over too, which will be our next task. If you've been following the process so far, you should be left with something like this. Some transfers which have a painted on look to them, whilst also being sealed and protected. But unless these markings have just been freshly applied, rarely does paint stay pristine, especially if exposed to the elements and a war zone. So to demonstrate just what a difference this can make, I've once again created 2 identically applied decals using all the steps demonstrated so far, and to one of these I applied a layer of the same paint that is beneath the decal, albeit heavily diluted. You're looking for a very subtle change in colour here, just enough to give the impression that the marking has begun to fade or be gradually worn away enough to start revealing the paintwork beneath it. Then, using that same paint once again, you can take a small piece of foam like this, dip it into your paint and gently sponge away the excess. There should be just enough paint left on the uneven surface that when you press the foam down lightly onto the transfer, it should leave behind some irregular flecks. As it dries, the flecks will begin to look like points where the paintwork has been chipped or scratched away. You can also achieve the same effect with some more deliberate brushstrokes. You can even further this weathering effect with chips of darker paint too. This creates the appearance of damage to both the marking and the paintwork, revealing the surface beneath. When you're done, you should be left with something like this. As you can see, in comparison to the unweathered decal, we now have something much more in keeping with the unforgiving environment you'd expect to see these materials in. So let's finish off by applying these final steps to my Corvus Belli Scots Guard and take a look at the finished miniature. And so, that concludes this more in-depth guide on how to get the most out of your decals and transfers. Whether you came to this guide as a complete beginner or as someone who has a bit of experience with them, I hope that you managed to glean some tips that you can apply to your future projects. Now, if you enjoyed this more focused kind of video, then please do let me know in the comments below what kind of techniques you often find yourself struggling with, and I'll keep them in mind for future guides. As I mentioned earlier, I just want to say a big thank you to Corvus Belli for sponsoring this video and for providing me with the Scots Guard miniature. You can find this along with many other fantastic looking miniatures as part of the Infinity range, which I've linked down below. But before I go, let me just say a huge thank you to everyone who continues to help keep the channel going. And if you'd like to support me too, you can get early access to ad-free videos, exclusive merchandise, and even your name in the credits. Simply follow my Patreon link below or hit the join button. Just like my top Patreon supporters did, who are Nail5, Axel Jonsson, Ban Yevrian, Berserker, Doko Tukaburi, Daniel Dowling, George Kanzini Roberts, Immaterial Creations, Cornbread, Maciej Savitsky, Matt Brower, Molly Mork, Mr. Grimm, Nima, Olden Time, Pale Juice, Ryan Little, Sam Sepulveda, Swedsman, Tim, and Warnovist. And my top channel members who are Alex Verne, David, Doug H, Guy Besant, Coach Cato, Lil Ely, Mark Taylor, Nerdington Paint, Omnitom, Philip Poya, S.O., Sotoran, That One Tech Priest, The City of Cryas, The Sire Acquired, and Whale Tussler. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.